Welcome back to Question Period. Well, the NDP seriously underperformed in last week's by-election in Quebec. The Liberals actually won it from the Conservatives, but that's the province that propelled the NDP to official opposition status in 2011. They're now lagging in the polls, unable to get that fresh new leader bump, despite electing the charismatic and popular Jagmeet Singh to the top job earlier this month. So, is Jagmeet Singh the answer to a party in need of another orange wave? Let's find out. Joining me now, NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh. Great to have you back on the program, Mr. Singh. Let's start with the Liberals' economic update. The Liberals are calling this great news. They say that it's the fastest growing economy in the G7, and they're pumping money back, clearly aimed at progressives, into things like the tax-free child benefit. But you call this bad news. Why is it bad news?
Well, one of the first things you got to point out is that this release was put out early, I think, on purpose to distract from the massive scandal that we're seeing with respect to Mr. Morneau. The other issue that we're seeing is that, in general, Canadians are feeling pretty squeezed. The income inequality is growing in our country, and we need to see more investments in terms of programs that will lift people out of poverty.
So you think this is all about damage control?
Well, I mean, it's pretty clear that this is pretty early in terms of, if you look at past years when this outlook is normally released, this is early. It conveniently is early right at a time when he's facing massive criticism, which for what might be one of the biggest examples of why we need to have very clear rules around ministers and ensuring that there's transparency with respect to their holdings and making sure that their decision-making is not in any way influenced by personal wealth or resources. Now, technicalities aren't the question here. It's that perception that is so fundamentally important. And all this create a perception that you can't trust decisions made by the Minister of Finance. That's troublesome. That's problematic.
All right, let's go to another critical issue, which is, of course, the NAFTA negotiation and specifically the auto industry. There's lots of concerns the U.S. is going to hammer Canada on something called rules of origin in the auto industry, where a car is made. That could hurt a lot of Canadian jobs in that sector. Can you clarify? Is the NDP pro-free trade or not? Do you want to keep NAFTA as it is?
So we've been very clear. It's not about free trade, it's about fair trade. If a trade agreement is struck that actually creates a net benefit for Canadians, that's good. If it actually creates a protection in place for the environment and creates a level playing field for workers and ensures that other jurisdictions have protections in place for their workers to organize or to work for better wages and better conditions, then it's appropriate. What we've seen under NAFTA is a clear example of all the things we were concerned of, that an agreement that didn't put workers first, that didn't put the benefit of Canadians first, and instead put the interests of a small group of corporations or folks who already had access to tremendous resources, put their interests first, and they definitely enjoyed a lot of benefits. But did everyday Canadians enjoy benefits? Did it actually in any way support our industries? That's the question. And I think with respect to any trade agreement, whether it's CETA or NAFTA, we need to make sure that there's a clear process that puts the interests of Canadians, workers, people before profits and before massive industries.
Mr. Singh, it's kind of interesting because you like to say it's not about free trade but fair trade. But you know who else also says that a lot is Donald Trump. So let me get this straight. You'd like to renegotiate this deal because you think it's a bad deal. That means essentially on that, you're on the Trump side. Is that right?
What I've said very clearly is that we need to make sure that the agreements are fair. I can tell you specifically what I have a problem with. Chapter 11, with respect to NAFTA, which doesn't allow us as a nation to be sovereign and make decisions about what we want to see happen in terms of health and in the environment.
Mr. Singh, you're the new leader of the party. There's been lots of media attention about you, even though you don't have a seat in the House. But new leaders usually get a bump in the polls. The problem is your party's actually going down in the polls. Now, I don't read too much into by-elections, but your party went from second to fourth place, dropped 17% in that recent by-election in Lac-Saint-Jean in Quebec. Are you worried that your party is going the wrong way in the polls?
Well, I can say one thing. I mean, after the election, there's been an incredible amount of excitement, and we've met a lot of people in Quebec. I went to Lac-Saint-Jean and to Alma and received a very warm reception. It was only 2 weeks into the election that I was elected as leader. We had an interim situation where there was a leader, but we knew there was going to be a new leadership race. So it was not a true reflection of my capacity to work on the ground and to campaign.
Tom Mulcair, the former leader, has said dozens of times that the niqab issue was the issue that killed the NDP's election chances in Quebec. They dropped your party from 59 seats to 16 seats. Now this is all back with Bill 62, the so-called religious neutrality bill or the veil ban. How are you going to handle that?
Well, I've said from before when this issue was when it first came to light, it was during a debate in Montreal during the leadership race. And I made it clear then that on a personal level, I'm absolutely opposed to it. I don't think it's absolutely in any way appropriate for the state to tell anyone what to wear or what not to wear. So I made my opposition very clear. At the same time, I'm very confident that there's laws that exist in Quebec, particularly a human rights and liberties law that's very strong and robust that will provide protections for these types of freedoms, freedom of thought and expression.
Look, the Charter does protect freedom, of course, but it doesn't protect you in politics. Are you worried this is going to hurt you and hurt your party again?
I'm confident that if we take a principled stance and realize that Quebec is a province of a multitude of issues, it's one of the most progressive nations in our country. It's got phenomenal policies with regards to childcare and affordable tuition, that the issues that matter to the people of Quebec are these type of progressive issues. These are issues that we're going to put forward that are going to connect to the people of Quebec, and I'm confident we can grow in not only maintain seats, but we will grow seats in that party.
Interesting, Mr. Singh. You said that Quebec is one of the most confident nations, that Quebec is a nation. You're open about that. Are you going to explicitly double down on Quebec being a nation in Canada?
One of the most progressive, not confident, but progressive nations. Absolutely. We are a federal nation, and as a federal country, we have many nations that make up this federal country. And one of those, it's been recognized already in the House that it's a distinct society. It is a nation. There's First Nations that make up Canada. This is the robust and beauty of Canada. We are a federalist country, and that's what makes it so beautiful, that we have all these pieces that we work together. And we need to create a climate and an environment where every party, every part of our country thrives and flourishes and needs to be respected that way.
Okay, we got to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us today, Mr. Singh. Appreciate it.
Of course, anytime.